Hi everybody and welcome back to Quarantine. I'm Amy. I use she, her, hers pronouns.
I'm Mitch. I use he, him, his pronouns.
And this week we wanted to talk to you about pronouns. So you've probably noticed at the beginning of all of our videos when we say who we are, we say I use she, her, hers or he, him, his. That's what we're talking about when we say pronouns.
Yeah, so it's something that a lot of people feel doesn't naturally flow in an introduction, but it's a really important way for people to have the opportunity to define themselves. So if I'm meeting this person who's sitting next to me for the first time, I'm not going to go, oh, hey, Heather, or how's it going, Eileen, until Amy corrects me and tells me her name. I'm going to ask her what her name is. So it's the same thing with pronouns, right? We want to call people what they want to be called. It's best practice all around for being respectful in our communication. So we can connect, what are your name, what's your name and what are the pronouns that you'd like me to use? And clarifying that they may want to be called different pronouns in different settings is also super important because not everybody is out in every setting. But Amy, we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, so when we're talking about why it's important to ask people their pronouns, we like to sort of use the metaphor of, think of a nickname you had when you were a child, and some of you might really like that nickname, and some of you really may not like that nickname. And you were okay being called that when you were younger, but if you went to work and somebody called you by that, you'd be mortified. So I always use the example, my first word when I was a baby was kitty, but I couldn't pronounce it, so I said Titi. And so for the longest time, even still now, my mom would call me Titi or Titi Bug. I love that nickname. I think it's super sweet, and it's something that's always connected me and my mom. However, in my professional setting at work, I would be mortified if my mother came to see me at work and I had a client sitting at my desk and she said, oh, hey, Titi. I would be so embarrassed because my client would now know, oh, okay, Titi, what does that mean? Oh, so since you were a baby, you've been called this name. I was here to talk to you about my trauma, and now it's really uncomfortable for all of us involved. So we like to say that it's sort of similar where you wouldn't want to be called your childhood nickname necessarily, so it's sort of the same thing when you're talking about who you are and what your identity is. You wouldn't want to be called he, him, his pronouns if you went by she, her, hers pronouns. I would be very uncomfortable if somebody used he, him, his pronouns for me because I'm very, very rooted in my identity as a female. And I'm very rooted in my identity using she, her, hers pronouns. So when we're talking about the importance of that, we like to bring that metaphor up sort of to put you in the shoes of somebody who maybe is being misnamed or, being called something that used to fit them but no longer fits them. And we always talk about how when someone's coming out and they're saying, oh, you know what, I use these pronouns now, or they're going through their path of identity and figuring out who they are, they might be trying pronouns on, they might be trying names on, and we always say that the number one key to providing respect for somebody is to let them define their reality to you, and then you just reflect that back to them.
One of the most efficient ways to accomplish this without the kind of awkwardness a lot of people feel having that conversation is to implement policies where people have the option to put their pronouns in their email signatures, in their Zoom names is one that I see very commonly right now, on name tags, on identification badges, things like that. Brian and Katie are two people who we work with in our agency that we love and appreciate, shout out, who have done a great job of helping us make sure that our pronouns are available on those materials. And that, like Amy is saying, gives people the opportunity to self-define in the work setting or the educational setting even what they want to be called. Not everyone will feel comfortable sharing pronouns. Not everyone has had that thought go through their head before. And that's okay. It's not an expectation. It's not something you want to demand. And you definitely don't want to make assumptions about people based on the fact that they don't disclose their pronouns. It's just providing the opportunity and being respectful and using what name and pronouns you are provided when that happens.
So there are a couple of different ways that you can go about finding somebody's pronouns out if you're not sure. So typically when we're having our staff meetings, we'll go around the room and a lot of us will say, I'm Amy, I use she, her, hers pronouns. Just as a sort of way to be like, this is who I am, this is how I would prefer to be called, this is what makes me feel the safest, moving on. So we typically like to do in our trainings and our meetings, what we'll do is we'll say, I'm Amy, I use she, her, hers pronouns, and then we provide like a silly question or something. So, my favorite flavor of ice cream is mint chocolate chip. Just as a sort of way to be like, boom, boom, boom. And then we're not dwelling on the fact that like, oh, there are also pronouns in there, because we're like, okay, this is who I am, this is how I like to be called, and this is the kind of ice cream I like to eat. It's a really simple way to bring it into the conversation without dwelling on it. If you're not comfortable, like Mitch said, there's never the expectation, even in a group setting, that you're going to say your pronouns out loud if you're not comfortable with it. What you can do is you can also pull somebody aside one-on-one and be like, hey, I just wanted to make sure that like I was making you feel as safe and as comfortable as possible. So, you're very female presenting or feminine presenting, but that might not always be the case for pronouns. Like, what would you prefer to be called? Just because you never know where somebody is in their journey, and just because I dress very femininely all the time doesn't necessarily mean that I prefer to use feminine pronouns. I might feel a lot more neutral, but feel the most comfortable in feminine clothing. Mm-hmm. So bringing up that conversation one-on-one is also a really simple way to be like, I see you and I want to respect you. How can I respect you?
Yeah, you never want to make assumptions or make decisions based on assumptions. Amy and I, we talk about how the only thing you can tell about a person when you first meet them is their gender expression based on the clothes that they are wearing at that time and on that day, but that may change. So you can't figure out their gender identity. You can't figure out their sexual orientation. Gaydar isn't real. I know that's shocking, but gaydar is a really harmful concept of the fact that our assumptions are able to define people better than people defining themselves.
And it really gives weight to those harmful stereotypes that have existed for years.
Mm-hmm. So you don't want to imply a practice where you are seeking people out or trying to clock people as being gender non-conforming, gender variant, or any such thing. This is an opportunity for respect that should be provided to everyone. Cis people who identify with the gender they were assigned at birth are often uncomfortable when bringing up pronouns. For example, I'm taking a class this semester and I asked a professor what her pronouns were in an email because I want to make sure that I'm providing that opportunity and referring to her in the most respectful way possible. And she told me that that's the first time in her entire professional career she's ever been asked that. And that was amazing to me because I find checking in on pronouns to be synonymous with respect. I know that that's a perspective that comes from my own trans experience. But it's really important to, not single people out. So those group introductions, like Amy was saying, are awesome. As well as, doing them every time. Even if you're in a room with a group of people you've met before, or people who you see all the time, constantly providing that opportunity to redefine lets people know that it's okay to explore and to find different ways of being, perceived. And that's okay. It's not that they're doing something wrong by changing, and it can be tough to keep up with, but you can be an incredibly important ally in somebody's life by giving them a space where they have that freedom to self-define. That's huge.
And when we're talking about singling people out, pulling somebody aside to have a one-on-one conversation is not singling somebody out. Singling somebody out is when you're in a group setting and everyone identifies themselves and then you're like, Lacey, you didn't say what pronouns you use. That's singling people out. We don't do that. What we do is say, okay, Lacey didn't want to say what their pronoun is, so we're just going to go generic until I know. A really simple way to overcome not knowing somebody's pronouns, and it's not very organic in conversation, just use their name over and over and over again, instead of saying I I don't know if she likes to be called she or them. I'm not really sure, because then you're stumbling all the time. Just be like, well, Lacey told me that, Lacey's not super sure how this computer programming works, so I'm going to go help Lacey. It sounds really weird and really uncomfortable because we don't typically use people's names, especially not over and over again. But if you're not sure and you don't know how to provide that respect for somebody, use their name. You know their name. So that's just as efficient.
And that's a great way, too, of sometimes when you do that, in referring to a person using just their name, if they are comfortable, they will use that opportunity to let you know what pronoun they'd like to be called without you having to guess or assume. And this also brings me to my favorite topic, the thing that I champion as an educator, gender-neutral they. So gender-neutral they exists. It's something we already use when we're talking about a person and we don't know their gender. So if I were in our conference room and I saw this calendar laying on the table, I would say, oh, somebody left their calendar. I hope they get it back. I wouldn't, make an assumption. You see his or her being used sometimes, but even that
it's kind of clunky.
Is clunky, yeah. So gender neutral they is a really quick, easy way, and you're already using it without knowing you're doing it. I guarantee it. Mm-hmm. So gender neutral they as a pronoun, one, of choice, like something that someone wants to be called by, and two, as a neutral option, isn't something that we're gonna grammatically challenge or argue about, because language, first of all, is super adaptive. Gender neutral they has been around since the time of Shakespeare. And two, it's not our role to tell other people how they are going to define themselves. I have done extensive assembly of resources about the grammar of gender neutral they. I'm more than happy to provide those resources at any time, because I know that we were mostly well taught that that wasn't something that you used to refer to somebody, but times are changing. And the other thing, too, to keep in mind is that gender neutral they does take time to adjust to. So a great resource that I often refer people to is a website called Practice with Pronouns, which actually gives you an ability to plug in somebody's name or just a generic name and then structure sentences using different pronouns. And there are pronouns, too, that transcend the binary completely that are on there as well. So if somebody discloses to you that they use a set of pronouns you've never linguistically used before, using Practice with Pronouns is a great opportunity because you can practice putting it in sentences and you can read the sentences out loud without being in a conversation with someone and feeling like that awkward clunkiness in person. That being said, too, I tell people all the time, if you want to have coffee with me and talk about a generic person with a set of pronouns that you haven't used before, I will facilitate that conversation because it is a hard skill to learn. Mm-hmm. I have a very dear friend who identifies as non-binary and uses gender neutral they, and they were the first person in my life that I encountered that with. So I personally used Practice with Pronouns to get used to it because I was raised by a couple of English teachers. So, I really had to adjust my language, but with practice and dedication and doing it because you want to respect and refer to someone you care about properly, you can master that skill and it will come with time. You just have to be open to practice and to corrections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so obviously we're not ever going to say that we're the masters of pronouns or the masters of identity because we can't know somebody's identity unless we specifically ask that individual person. So what we're doing is just kind of giving you the base to sort of grow off of and do that education. And Mitch and I say all the time, reach out to us if you've got questions, even if it's something that you're not sure if it has to do with somebody's gender identity. So my mom the other day, my mom's a nurse at a family practice, and she had a question about a patient, and she was, she very vaguely, because HIPAA, she asked me a question about, so this client was transgender, and some of the language they were using, my mom wasn't sure if it had something to do with their identity as a trans person, or if it was just sort of like some sort of buzzword that was going around, that she's not hip to youth lingo or, whatever it was. But my mom took the time to be like, hey, I know that you're a person, A, in the LGBTQ community, but also you're a person who works and serves the LGBTQ community. I have this question. Can you sort of talk me through that? And my heart was so warmed when she did that, because I was like, what a great way to show up as an ally when you're not sure. Go to a resource that might be able to help you. And in doing that, I didn't have concerns before, but like I now know that my mother is going to be a safe place for LGBTQ patients who come to her. Mm-hmm. And I loved it. I was so,
that's awesome.
I know, I love my mom, but it was just a super simple, quick, like, hey, what does this mean? Is this related to gender identity? No? Okay, thank you for answering that. Now I know how to work with this client a little bit better moving on. And because she was like, you know what? I have an awareness that there are some things I don't understand, but I know somebody who does understand them better than I do. Let me go to that person so I can better serve my clients. Similarly to how we provide safe zone trainings, or Practice with Pronouns exists as a website to practice. It's okay not to know how to do things. And then once you start learning, then your responsibility becomes to respect that person's identity to the best of your ability. And if you hear something going on where, you're at work and a coworker goes by they, them pronouns, and you hear them being misgendered, that's a really good time for you, if they've said out loud, like in staff meetings, this is my name and I use they, them pronouns. And then you hear somebody saying, oh, she, that's a really good time for you as an ally to be like, actually, they really prefer to be called by this pronoun. Another really easy way to do that is, if our supervisor was like, can you believe Mitch is watching Frozen 2 again? I can't believe her. I would say, I can believe Mitch is watching Frozen 2 again. He has his entire guest bedroom based on that. He loves Disney. That's a really simple way to correct without even doing a call out, just being like, I heard you use she, I'm going to bounce that back to you and use his preferred pronouns. Or use his pronouns, not even preferred, just his pronouns. Mm-hmm. That's a really simple way to do that and provide that education without making somebody feel like they've been called out or sort of slapped on the wrist.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be confrontational. Certainly, if something is deliberately, consistently happening over and over after a few respectful corrections, that's when you would say, I know that this coworker, this client, has told us that these are their pronouns. We need to be respecting their pronouns. But there's a whole, period of adjusting that can happen with those sentence corrections prior to getting to that point. So don't feel like you have to be the pronoun police, but just being that gentle, consistent reminder. Again, gender neutral they comes up a lot. People are getting used to using it in their language. So when somebody says, oh, she is needing an extra cup of coffee today, she's super tired, I'll say, oh, yeah, I think we're all tired. I'll go get them a cup of coffee and bring it to their office. I've been there. It's super easy, and the person hears that, and we found it to be incredibly effective, much more so than the confrontation, because we're not trying to judge people. And that being said, too, when you misgender someone, I never say if, I say when, because it will happen, it does happen, and you use the wrong pronouns, you've referred to them incorrectly, and you are corrected, take the note and move on. You don't need to apologize, you don't need to swear and say, I really got to get this right, you don't need to beat yourself up, and you certainly don't need to fall all over yourself to the person and, tell them how awful you feel about using the wrong pronouns, because that then puts the person who has been affected by that action in the position where they have to comfort the person who said something wrong in the first place, and that's not really helpful or fair in any way, shape, or form. So when you misgender someone and you are corrected, correct yourself, make a third reiterating statement using the right pronouns, or thank the person for correcting you, and move on. Don't hold on to it. It's not a mark against you on your report card of allyship. It's just a simple linguistic mix-up, and as long as you're genuine in your attempts to do better next time, it's okay. And we don't need to be apologized to for it.
Yeah. So we'll put a link to the Practice with Pronouns website in the comments below. But if you ever have any questions or concerns, or if you think there's something else we should touch on regarding pronouns, please let us know. Otherwise, keep fighting the good fight and show up as an ally.
Yeah, and enjoy your weekend.
Bye.
Weekend.
Oh.
Whatever. Whenever this comes out.
Yeah. I don't know when it's coming out.
Next week sometime.
Bye.
Bye.